and welcome back to The Right Turn, your one-stop shop for all things fiction writing. I'm your host, author Jordan M. Griffin, and first, I'd like to give you all a huge thank you and a welcome back. It has been almost 2 years to the day since I last posted, and now the podcast is back with new ideas, tips, tricks, and talks. You can expect episodes on a monthly basis instead of weekly, but that's not because there's less going on. Quite the opposite, in fact. There is something for everyone, so let me take a moment to tell you about everything I've been doing in the last 2 years. First, Ballad of a Broken Songbird is an adult fantasy lit RPG following Vitani, a hellspawn with blossoming magic capable of ripping minds apart from the inside out. Running from her past, she sets out with several companions in an attempt to reclaim her own authority and start a new life, if her memories will let her go. You can read that for free on Royal Road, where Chapter 31 has just gone up. The novel has over 100,000 words and has at least another 20,000 or so more to go, and that's just for the first installment of the series. So I highly recommend that you check it out if you're looking for a high-stakes, magic-soaked world of fantasy adventure. The link for that, as well as the links for everything I'm about to talk about, can be found in the description of this episode. If fantasy isn't your thing, I have a series of craft articles that can also be read for free over on Patreon. Each one is like a mini podcast episode covering some element of craft or story writing. There are 4 so far, with titles like Mental Walls and Their Effect on Characters Stuck in the Past, Tavern Brawls and Court Politics, How to Balance Types of Tension in Fantasy Storytelling, and Trapped Inside, When Systems of Power Turn Isolation into Weaponry and Punish the People Who Wield it to Survive. Each takes between 10 and 15 minutes to read, and they're meant to be smaller, more niche areas of craft that might not be suited to a full podcast episode. Those come out once a week, either on Monday or Tuesday. Also on Patreon are the first chapters of a bunch of works in progress, so you can see what I'm working on and maybe even add your own opinion if you'd like. That's available to paid tier members, as well as other perks such as advanced chapters, behind-the-scenes looks, and deleted scenes. I'm also in the process of recording the audiobook for Ballad of a Broken Songbird, which will be on Patreon as well. In addition to that, I have a free monthly newsletter that goes out at the beginning of each month. If you're looking for writing opportunities such as contests and free classes, if you want to hear what it's like to live as a full-time writer or hear anecdotes about how novels are progressing and learn what it's like to work inside of this industry, then that newsletter is definitely for you. That, and like I said, all the other links can be found in the description of this episode, so definitely check those out. So you might be asking, what topic has ignited me enough to pull me out of a 2-year cave where I have been feverishly finishing a novel, going on submission with that novel, starting the web novel, and embarking upon all of these other new creative ventures? Well, the good news is that there are a lot of them, and there's several episodes that I have planned. And today we're going to be talking about structural roles in fantasy, specifically about archetypes. What are they? Why do they exist? How do they help your novel? And how do we expand past them so that your story is bigger, better, and most importantly, different from every other story out there? Structural roles exist in all mediums of storytelling. They are the puzzle pieces we use to construct the basic framework of a story. You might hear words such as protagonist, antagonist, and support. Those are structural roles. Or perhaps we're looking at something more like hero, villain, sidekick, and mentor. Those are archetypes. Whatever the scope of the role, structural supports such as these exist to give the story a framework that we can then work within as authors. A funny sidekick, for example, may be cliché on its face. After all, how many stories can you name right now that have a character which fills that exact niche? But when we look at elements of storytelling, we find that that role fills a very necessary purpose. We all know that the protagonist is one that must go through the most drastic change. She has the most to learn, both about herself and the world. That change, by necessity, comes with a great deal of emotional turmoil and hardship. What do we do when we experience hard times in our lives? We turn to our friends and our support systems, right? They cheer us on while making us laugh and remind us every step of the way that we can do this. The jokester sidekick fills that same role within the framework of a story. They have to be strong enough to support the protagonist and gentle enough to make her smile as they do it. They make jokes to lift the audience out of the tension of the story, even if it's just for a moment. In short, they exist in so many stories because they are necessary in so many stories. And we can go even more abstract with that role. Say we have a story with a rogue type character, right? That is such an archetype in genre fiction that you probably imagine someone who fills that role from a novel that you love, or maybe a novel that you're reading. It's usually a shadowy character who doesn't play by the rules, who seems to be out for themselves more than out for the benefit of the group. And they usually have a particular penchant for getting into places they shouldn't, no matter the means. This character, like the comic relief sidekick, appears in hundreds, if not thousands, of novels across fantasy, science fiction, crime, thriller, and other genres. Why? Why does this same archetype pop up again and again, just with a different face and name? It, like the sidekick, speaks to something universal about the human condition, a manifestation of what it looks like to get things done, regardless of the consequences. To be willing to go just outside the law when that law is not serving the best interests of the people. To embody the successful, skilled, jaded, and sometimes cruel aspect of what living within a society requires. In other words, the rogue is what many of us wish we could be. That is why these, and every other archetype, exists in fiction. They are physical manifestations of the human condition, whittled down into easily understood and defined chunks. There is no escaping these aspects of life, and so there is little escaping them when we write our stories. And in truth, you don't want to escape. Every story has a protagonist because every story has a character who must undergo change. Why fight it? Does it ruin the story to know that the main character is not going to end up in the same place that they started? Or is that what readers expect and want? Humans are far from constant, and seeing someone else struggle with the same challenges we have undergone is not only reassuring, it allows us to feel that we are not alone. Is the sidekick worthless because he is ubiquitous? Try to write a story without a supporting character. Isolate that protagonist, and what do you have? A deeply introspective look at solitude, sure, but what else is there? What do you see reflected back at you when you engage in the story? Nothing half as interesting as what we see when we broaden our cast of characters, I promise you that. Archetypes serve as reflections of the world around us. They give authors a form of shorthand to let readers know the role a character is meant to play without aggressively explaining it to the audience. Archetypes cut down on exposition and allow authors to build off of the frameworks we already understand, because those frameworks mirror our experiences in life. Now, I hear you saying that cliches will kill a novel before it starts. Archetypal characters are dangerous because they're all the same. I know the sidekick is going to die because he always dies. I know the protagonist is going to let down his mentor because that's how the story always goes. And there is some truth to that. You're not wrong. So, what do? We've been told to avoid cliche at all costs, but I've just spent several minutes telling you that archetypes are, on some level, required for storytelling. How do we avoid our characters turning out predictable, trite, or just plain boring? Well, the way we do everything else in writing, we let them grow past the walls of expectation. One way to expand a character past their role is through their relationships. Who do they care about? Who can they not stand to lose? Who matters so much that our character is willing to break every promise they've ever made just to keep that person safe? Love is a fantastic leverage point. And I don't mean romantic love, although that, of course, is an option. Love comes in many forms, and all of them are potent. The love between a parent and a child, love between siblings, love between friends who have been through everything together and come out the other side unrecognizable from who they were before. Imagine, for example, that comic relief sidekick we just talked about. Let's call him Ian. Ian is a spaceship mechanic, a person for whom the world doesn't make much sense unless he's got a wrench in his hand and a schematic in front of his face. He's the second-hand guy to the ship's captain, a no-nonsense woman by the name of Rima. They've been through 10 years of service together, have had each other's backs through dozens of scrapes. Ian does whatever Rima says, simply because it's her saying it. He trusts her completely, and her him. Now, if we were sticking to archetypes and the traditional story arc, the next few scenes would go like this. There would be another impossible adventure. Rima would have to make a tough choice, and Ian would be killed in the process. She'd carry that guilt for the rest of the story, always remembering when her wrong decision cost her her best friend. Instead, what if we do something different? What if Rima gives the order, and for the first time, Ian takes a deep breath, squares his shoulders, and says no? For a moment, Rima pauses. She gives the order again, but Ian holds firm. His sister is on the enemy ship, he says. He's not going to risk her life, not like this. Now we have something much more interesting than the expected storyline. Rima has a choice to make. Does she listen to Ian, understanding where he's coming from and adjusting her plan? Does she give him the same unwavering loyalty he has always given her? Or does she push forward, used to her will being heeded? Does she even know what to do when Ian takes a stand? Let's say Rima gives the order anyway. She ignores Ian's plea and moves forward with her original plan. That enemy ship is blown to pieces, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it was an illegal pirate ship that really needed to be stopped. It doesn't matter to Ian. His trust in Rima is shattered. Their friendship is in ruins. He asked one thing of her and she could not deliver. Meanwhile, Rima has finally found one thing more important to Ian than her. It shakes her to know that their trust had a boundary she didn't even know about. See how suddenly we have a lot more pieces to this puzzle? Ian went from henchman sidekick to a living, breathing person with feelings and attachments of his own. Forcing him to choose between the two most important people in his life put him in an impossible place. And that place explodes across the page with tension, emotion, and choice, that magical mix which keeps readers engaged well past the time they thought they'd put the book down. This approach works because the audience expects the characters to fall into their archetypes and is surprised when they don't. Let's look at another way to do this. What if instead the character itself is a walking subversion of their archetype? Let's take Ariana. Ariana runs a bakery, the kind of shop that has a line a mile long and wafts the smell of cinnamon for 2 blocks in either direction. She's the kind of woman who wears flowers in her hair and smile like an article of clothing. Her brightly patterned dresses are as much a part of a village Saturday morning as the honey lavender tea she brews herself. One evening, a strange man knocks on the door. Ariana's husband, a gentleman with the hands of a carpenter and wire-rimmed spectacles named Robert, answers. The strange man speaks in cryptic questions, inquiring as if looking for a famous, long-dead assassin who had once killed the corrupt king many years ago. Robert denies him, insisting this man has the wrong house and the village doesn't have anybody like that. No one he knows even comes close to this description. The man insists, asking questions until Ariana emerges from the back room and greets this stranger by name. Imagine Robert's surprise when he discovers his flower crown wearing, cinnamon roll baking wife had quite the different career before they met. How is she going to navigate this rift in her marriage? Is she going to take on whatever task this stranger has? Even if she returns to her assassin ways, she's not the all-black wearing, brooding, dark soul assassin type. No, she's bubbly and cute and the kind of woman who has a smile at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning. And she's all the more interesting for it. See how there's less of the unexpected in the actions of the story, right? Shadowy man arriving in the middle of the night and revealing that a woman has a dark past, much to the dismay and confusion of her current partner, is not a new thing. But having the character being so subversive is what makes this different. Now we're curious as to how Ariana worked. Did she lure people in, giving them a false sense of security? Has she done the same thing with Robert? Is she a trained combatant, her hands and feet as deadly as any knife, or does she kill in a different way? The unknown of both the character and the overall situation is what drives engagement here. The arc of the character might be the same as the archetype, going back in for one last job, perhaps. But because we have given Ariana such different mechanics, that story is going to look nothing like what we've seen before. The plot doesn't have to work as hard not to be cliche. In fact, by its very nature, it cannot be cliche unless we somehow turn Ariana into every other assassin we've ever seen, which would be a massive disappointment. Subverting archetypes doesn't have to be something we only see behind the scenes either. It doesn't have to happen only in the drafting phase. Characters can grapple with their archetype for the majority of the story. How many times have we seen characters stuffed into boxes, either by society, their family, or themselves? How often have we felt the same way? There are fewer things more deeply human than the struggle of shrugging off expectations and stepping into the wants we have for our own lives. Using archetypes to show this in your fiction can be a powerful way of illustrating the struggle of breaking down invisible barriers to achieve our own success. Take, for example, a young prince. He's been raised in a kingdom that values, above all else, power, war, and prowess in battle. They have conquered many lands and enslaved many people, and show no signs of stopping soon. At the beginning of the story, the young prince makes a show of attending a parade and honoring both his people and his father, who is the king. He pretends to stand behind what the armies are doing, but something doesn't sit right with him. He hides this discomfort, assuming it to be nothing more than the anxieties of coming into his birthright. His father, pleased with the show of patriotism, gives the young prince a contingent of soldiers and instructs him to take an island colony which has managed to hold out against the kingdom. The island people are proud and strong, and the king tells his son he will need to break their spirit to achieve victory. The son sets sail on his fleet of ships. He grapples with what it means to be a conqueror, but he puts any misgivings aside in favor of appearing strong for his soldiers and for his father. When they land on the beaches, he achieves a steady stream of military victories. However, the more land he takes, the more that his men burn and capture and kill, the worse the feeling inside him gets. Until one morning his men circle a village and demand that the village surrenders. The people refuse, preferring to fight, so his men, without waiting for an order, begin setting fire to the village. The houses burn, screams erupt from within the smoke, and the prince sees parents fleeing with children, elderly falling to the ground coughing, soldiers falling to the arrows of his own men. Unable to face the guilt of what he's done, the prince abandons his army. He wanders dazed through the foliage of the island until an enemy patrol picks him up. He is captured and taken prisoner, where the people hope to use him as a bargaining chip to end the war. As the prince comes back to himself and becomes more aware, he realizes that his father will never honor any agreement that is made. His father, the king, will arrive with more ships, more soldiers, and will pretend to strike an honorable deal. Once the prince has been safely returned to his father's soldiers will kill everyone and claim the island as theirs. Disgusted with himself, his people, and his father, the prince does something drastic. He offers himself and his army to help this island. Though suspicious at first, the people who were once his enemy eventually agree, and together the prince rises into the version of himself he was always meant to be, the one who stands for everything his father hates. Devoting time to the prince's internal struggle, putting that fight against the prince's archetype front and center, allows you as a writer to take your time with the idea of archetypes and the places that they fall drastically short. You can illustrate in painful detail how a title does not define a whole person, nor does a nationality, an identity, or any other group the world likes to lump us into. The redeemed prince is nothing new. It speaks to the idea that there is good in all of us, if we are only strong enough to see it and own it. However, this prince's specific journey, that deep internal struggle, and the way that struggle affects the world around him, that is the part that makes this story unique and worth reading. You can see now how archetypes are nothing to shy away from. In fact, they are hugely necessary in storytelling. What we do want to ensure is that we're not feeding the same story the same way into the machine over and over and over again. Instead, we find the places that archetype transforms into something more, something deeply, unmistakably human. Thank you all for listening, and I hope this talk was helpful to you. If you really liked the episode, leave a review or share it with someone else you think would benefit from this discussion. If you're interested in telling us a story about your own writing experience, sharing your work with us, or you just want to say hi, you can send an email to writeturn@gmail.com. That's WRIT3, the number 3, TURN @gmail.com. If you'd like to engage with the community in other ways, you're welcome to subscribe to the newsletter at jordanmgriffin.com, which will tell you when new episodes come out. In addition, I have an Instagram, which will let you know when everything comes out. So you'll see new chapters, you'll see uploaded podcast episodes, you'll see craft articles, all on that Instagram page. The link for that will be in the episode description. Don't forget about Ballad of a Broken Songbird, that web novel with over 100,000 words that can be found on Royal Road, as well as much more of my writing, which can be found on Patreon. As always, I wish you all the best in your own writing. Have a great day, and if it's not a good one, I hope that the next one is better. See you next time.